More now on Brexit, and there is a little over 2 weeks until the end of the transition period and still no agreement on some of the key issues. Downing Street says it remains hopeful a deal can be made, and the EU saying it remains totally dedicated to reaching an agreement. But can a deal actually be made within the timeframe? And why did the Prime Minister agree to extend the deadline if no deal is, to use his words, wonderful for the UK? Joining me now is Ben Habib, Chairman of BREXIT Watch and former MEP for London, and Sonia Sodha, Chief Lead Writer at The Observer. Hello to you both. Ben Habib, the fact that they're still talking, they haven't thrown in the towel yet, what does that tell us?
Well, that tells you, I think, what we already know, that they are almost certainly going to do a deal. I've always felt that they're going to do a deal, that the deal would be announced at the last minute. And, the Prime Minister's been in a bit of a bind ever since he signed the withdrawal agreement and Northern Irish Protocol, because he couldn't really unpick it. He tried to unpick it. And the only other way to do it, the only other way to mask its pernicious effect, that border down the Irish Sea, is to do a deal with the EU that ties us closely into the EU. So the minute he signed that withdrawal agreement, I've always been of the view that we will do a deal this year, and it won't be a deal that's brilliant for the United Kingdom.
In what sense, then? You're saying that it'll be left to the last minute and then there's not as much time then for scrutiny and pushback?
Absolutely. I'd put money on this being choreographed. We've had complete opacity on precisely what's being negotiated for many weeks now. They've been in this kind of tunnel, as they call it. So none of us none of us who normally comment on this sort of thing are going to have time to call it out. No one in Parliament's going to call it out because of his majority and Labour being unprepared to vote against a deal, to be seen to be voting against a deal. So he's going to announce this deal, maybe with a few days left for the end of this year, bounce it through Parliament, and hey presto, he's got what he wants and the EU's got what it wants. But it won't be the kind of sovereign compliant deal that we were promised.
Sonia Sodha, a deal at the very last minute, says Ben. What do you think?
I'm thinking that the noises are sounding more hopeful in the last 24 hours than they have been in the last sort of 2-3 weeks. So I think that the fact that talks have been extended is in of itself a positive sign. The noises that we're hearing coming out of the talks, it sounds like there is a bit more meeting halfway on both sides, particularly on this major issue around what happens if we strike a deal and then there's big regulatory divergence, either the UK from the EU or the EU from the UK, whichever way round you want to look at it. The EU saying there needs to be the ability to put in place the tariffs, the sort of tariffs that we would have under no deal anyway, and the UK has been resisting that. But it does sound like there's a bit more agreement there now. Ben just talked about this idea of a sovereign compliant deal. I think this has been the problem with Brexit all along. People were promised this notion of taking back control. They were promised this notion of national sovereignty. And the problem is that in the world that we live in today, 19th century notions of national sovereignty don't exist anymore. Every country does lots and lots of trade with other countries. And it's the very nature of trade deals that when you strike a trade deal with a very close neighbour, you do sort of limit your sovereignty in some ways, in the sense that you strike agreements on things like regulations, labour standards, environmental standards. So the fact of the matter is we can't be a modern economy in a world where there's lots of interconnection, where there's globalisation, and pretend that we can be a 19th century style sovereign nation anymore. That just doesn't really exist. And you can see that if we were to strike a trade deal with the US negotiators have already laid out where they want to reach agreement with the UK, and it includes the UK accepting regulatory standards from the US, not the EU. So it just is a fact of the matter. It's just wrong to think that there is this idea of a 19th century sovereign nation that Britain can go back to. The world just doesn't work like that anymore.
Ben, it's back to that you can't have your cake and eat it argument, isn't it, as Sonia's saying there? If you want to do trade deals, you've got to give some compromise.
No one has proposed a 19th century concept of sovereignty, whatever Sonia might think that is. But it's utterly wrong, for example, for the Court of Justice of the European Union to have any say in British courts post our leaving the transition period. It was wrong, frankly, for them to have had any say during the transition period, but we signed up to that. There is no trade deal in the world which is governed by the counterparty's court. And that is at the heart of the problem here. Fine, we can agree mutual understandings on regulatory compliance with competition, employment, environmental, and so on, those kinds of laws. But we have to have the ability to deviate if we need to deviate for Britain's reasons, and we must not be judged by anything other than an independent arbitration panel. The withdrawal agreement at the moment gives the ECJ huge sway over Northern Ireland. I'm actually, by the way, while I'm on the topic of Northern Ireland, I'm amazed how little scrutiny mainstream media has given the Northern Irish Protocol. Really, people should be jumping up and down about the wedge that has been put through the union of the United Kingdom with EU state aid law, EU VAT law, excise duties, all applying in Northern Ireland. And that is not normal for a trade deal. It is not normal to sign up to someone else's laws and regulations and for them to judge whether or not that you signed up, whether or not you're complying with them. That is wholly abnormal. So my definition of sovereignty is not harking back, as Sonia would like to portray it, as some sort of nostalgic trip down memory lane with the imperial past of the United Kingdom. There are 17.4 million people in this country who are looking forward to a liberated United Kingdom, able to compete on the international stage, setting its own chart, its own direction, subject only to its own laws, judged by the UK's judiciary.
Sonia, let's pick up on the point of Northern Ireland there. Should we be jumping up and down more then about the position Northern Ireland is going to find itself in on the 1st of January with a toehold in the EU still?
Well, it's kind of not ideal to have a border down the Irish Sea, but our politicians are told again and again that this was going to be one outcome if we wanted a sort of so-called clean break in inverted commas Brexit. And what Ben's comments completely ignore is that there's a very unique situation on the island of Ireland, and that is that the Good Friday Agreement, the Northern Ireland peace process, was contingent on Northern Ireland being part of the single market, the whole of the UK being part of the single market and the customs union, in order to eliminate the need for any physical border on the island of Ireland. So that has always been absolutely at the heart of the Northern Ireland peace process. Now, if you want to take the whole of the UK, including Northern Ireland, out of the single market and the customs union, that implies the need for some sort of border. And that does, unfortunately, call into question some of the fundamental assumptions of the Good Friday Agreement. So Ben says that there's no trade deal that includes, allowances like we have in the Northern Ireland Protocol. Well, that's because, there's no trade deal that's been struck where a nation is trying to extricate itself from some really, really complex arrangements where there is actually needs to be no border for the sake of, a 30-year peace process. So, that's why we're in the position that we're in, and it's why if the UK wanted to withdraw from the customs union and single market, it always had to find a solution for Northern Ireland. And Ben doesn't like it. That is just the reality of the Good Friday Agreement and what we signed up to.
Ben Habib, Sonia Sodha, thank you both very much.